Are we ready to go?
Yeah, if you can just can you
closer.
tuck in a little bit more.
Yeah.
Is this mine? Am I all right
it is,
drinking it?
yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. One gin, is that right?
I need more than one these days.
We're good.
All right. Becky, thanks. Do you want Rebecca or Becky through the interview?
Whatever, Becky's fine.
Yeah. We'll edit that bit off. Becky, thanks for coming. Fresh from the hustings.
Pleasure, yeah.
Loads of questions for you. First question, you've said that from Blythe Valley to Brixton we need to win.
Yeah.
Lisa said we need to win back the trust of people in Wigan, Workington and Wrexham. Keir said no victory without values. Is alliteration the way to win election campaigns?
No, big ideas are the way to win election campaigns, and that's how we're going to win the next general election. It's not just about talking about values, it's about setting out a vision of what the North East and other parts of the country are going to look like under a Labour government. And we had some transformational ideas in the last manifesto, but we didn't sell them in the way that we should. We didn't have a message that spoke to people's aspirations and said, if you were in County Durham, whatever your job, whatever your postcode, whatever your income, all of our policies were about making your life better.
Well, let's pick up on some of them later. At the moment, you're basically auditioning to be Prime Minister, but you're going to be vilified, you're going to be misrepresented.
Yeah.
Why do you want to put yourself through this?
Because, and it's the reason that brought me to politics, we've got a saying in Salford, it's our council's motto, the welfare of the people is the highest law. And that's what drives everything that I do. All of the ideas that I've been working on for the last 4 years, they weren't just great grand plans. They had the potential to improve quality of life for everyone right across the country. And it will be hard. And when a person comes along that will shake up the system and bring that change and stamp out inequality, they will be vilified, they will be attacked by elements of the right-wing press.
So how are we going to deal with that? I think Richard Bergen suggested a free news sheet. My brother's a broadcast journalist. He says what Labour should do is just put some money, find a good television producer and have an internet TV channel. Is that the way we're going to have to do it?
Well, it is. Well, that's one way to do it. Embracing new forms of media is right. Being part of the social fabric of our communities. So our members are in there, in the pubs, in the clubs, in the libraries, in the social spaces of our communities, talking about politics and our ideas. But it's also about rebutting more ferociously the misrepresentations and the smears when they become apparent. And we haven't done that. And that's why we need a really robust rebuttal unit in the party to deal with those smears very, very quickly. And we also need to have a digital organising team that goes toe-to-toe with the likes of Dominic Cummings, that produces the content that goes out and becomes viral on social media, that wins hearts and minds.
And feeds in all the stories from all the activists, all the mayors and councillors are already doing things in practice. In North of Tyne, I've created 2,500 jobs. You got a Tory mayor in Tees Valley who's blown 35 million setting up an airport, losing 5 million a year to create 1,000 jobs. This is the sort of stuff we should be saying.
Exactly, exactly.
Our economics, our politics, our common sense.
Exactly, and all the countries right around Western Europe are doing these things. And they're not saying that these policies are radical, they're accepted as being common sense. So we've got to shift the ground now and show that, look, this socialist aspiration that we're working towards, if it's good enough for other countries in Western Europe and they're getting a better quality of life, then it's good enough for us.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, as leader, you've got the same 24 hours in a day as everybody else has. I know how hard you work now, and how hard I work, and I have a vague memory of having a wife and children somewhere. But you're going to have to prioritise. So let's use a footballing analogy. You can be the centre forward, winning votes out in front of the media. You could be the manager, sorting out the tactics, coming up with the policies, or you could be the chairman of the board, sorting out the resources.
I have to pick two because I have been developing the ideas,
right.
and that's what I think makes me different from many of the other candidates, is that I've actually been looking at the details and developing these policies. I know how they will work, but that's what makes me best placed to be visible in the media as well as a leader, and I'd want to be out there all the time selling our policies and selling our vision.
So a bit like Brian Robson when he was player manager at Borough.
Yeah, a bit like that.
So, I mean, we're officially a socialist party. It says it in the rule book. And it's now okay to say that, which it really wasn't. You know, it was a bit of a taboo word.
No, it wasn't 5 years ago.
But it's still a bit edgy to say you want to replace capitalism. Do you?
Not replace capitalism, no, because that wouldn't make us a democratic socialist party, which is what we are. But what we need to do is recognise that capitalism in its current form isn't working here in the United Kingdom. We're seeing inequality grow. We have people on 0-hour contracts waiting for a text, akin to how it was in the Victorian times where people were queuing at the docks for work. We know there needs to be a fundamental shift in the way our economy works.
So what would be that fundamental shift?
So the first important task that I've got is creating jobs, creating industries and making sure that everyone in our communities is able to get those jobs through a decently funded education system. But when we create that prosperity in those industries by investing publicly in new forms of infrastructure and new industries themselves, we've got to make sure that the wealth that's created goes into the hands and into the pockets of those who create that wealth, our communities, our workers,
But that's the very conflict you're talking about that we're going to get hammered for from the right-wing press. How do we do it? You know, do we just simply ban companies like Amazon from operating on that basis?
We need to make sure that companies here in the UK adopt ethical practices. They have trade unions in every single workplace who collectively sectoral bargaining and push up terms and conditions for the workforce. And there's an economic reason for this because it's not just a good thing to do. In those countries where they have strong trade union activism, they're more productive economies because the workers have good relationships with management, they can sort out any problems on the shop floor, they can think of new ways to make the processes that they work with faster, and it's good for everyone ultimately. So when we create the new industries of the future, I want those that are involved in that to not just think of the usual models of business and look at those cooperatives, those ways of sharing out the wealth and the prosperity across the workforce so that the economy works for us instead of us working for the economy.
And there's so much good work being done with that. I'm in the process of setting up a bank owned by the people. It's not just me, Mark Drayford's doing it in Wales, doing it in the Northwest. A teachers cooperative so that the supply agencies are actually owned by the people who are the supply teachers, all of that sort of stuff. So on policy, you've spoken a lot about the green industrial revolution. You've said that we need to be decarbonising by 2030. That might be difficult if we're not in power. Depends, you know, how much of a mess they've left. But what's on the table? What's not on the table in that?
There's a huge amount of stuff on the table. And firstly, we can't move from that 2030 target because we've been told by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that the vast majority of action needs to take place before 2030 to decarbonise. Otherwise, we're going to reach a tipping point where we're not going to be able to stop climate change. So we've got a choice to make. We can turn it into the biggest economic opportunity we've ever seen. We can bring industry to the northeast, whether it's wind farms, whether it's carbon capture storage, whether it's other new forms of renewable technology, and we can invest in them and support them and create jobs and security and prosperity here in this region at the same time as tackling climate change, or we wait until 2024 and we see how bad it's got by then. So we can't wait that long. We've got to work with people like yourself who are driving forward this agenda, and we've got to create a movement that puts pressure on the Conservative government to take those steps now.
I wrote an article a while back saying to people, do you remember in the Ukraine crisis where we were happy to put travel bans on Putin and his cronies, seize their assets? As Prime Minister, that's the sort of thing we should be doing for people like Jair Bolsonaro if they're going to be burning the Amazon.
Exactly, and we've got a duty to lead the world in tackling climate change. We've actually got COP26 coming to the UK, and unfortunately be under a Conservative government, but that's our opportunity to bring the movement together, to put pressure not just on Boris Johnson but other countries across the world, because it makes no difference to climate change if we're doing everything that we should do here in the UK and other countries across the world aren't. But we've got an opportunity to lead, to export our industries to other parts of the world to help them tackle climate change. And that's good for our economy and it's good for jobs. But we've got to give those countries a push.
Yeah, it was funny. That was one of the things that got the biggest round of applause at the last Labour Party conference when John McDonnell said, and we will make this intellectual property available to the global south. And everyone's thinking, exactly. Global socialism, yeah. I'm working with some XR people on COP26, and what we might do, we might have a parallel event called Good Cop, Bad Cop.
That's good.
Paying for it, I think pretty much all the candidates have said we like where we were in the manifesto on tax. John McDonnell was talking about borrowing at record low rates to finance the purchase of the industries, mail, rail, water. You still supportive of that approach?
Yeah, because it was an economic case as well as a moral case for those things. So if you look at water and the energy networks, for example, they've been repeatedly criticised for overcharging customers, and the market was basically out of control. But there was another reason. They weren't investing in the critical infrastructure that was necessary to make sure that their services were up to speed, but also to an extent that they were supporting local businesses that wanted to engage in the energy revolution, if you like. And that's why we needed to take them into public ownership so that we could have control, invest where we needed to invest, support those businesses, but also spur on what we talked about before, the new models of ownership. Yeah. So if you had a wind farm off the northeast coast, for example, you could have asked for that to have been part owned by government, part owned by the private sector, with the government and the public having a 51% stake. And that didn't just mean that we had more control over what profits were being used to do, whether it was reinvested into the business, but it also meant we could help what happened on the supply chain. We could make sure those wind farms were made with British steel, supporting jobs here. So it was a win-win for everyone, that collaboration, really.
Yeah, tying it into the skills development, all of that work that needs to be doing, wealth taxes has come up, and I'm delighted that in a leadership battle for the Labour Party, everyone's saying, actually, not everybody is saying wealth taxes, but there's wealth taxes like inheritance tax, but how far would you want to be going on this?
We've got to have a fair taxation system, and where we were at in the last manifesto it was below the average of other leading industrial nations in terms of the amounts that we were going to charge. So we weren't being radical on tax by any stretch of the imagination. But we've got to understand what tax is for. Tax is there to fund our public services, to fund education, to fund vital things such as the fire service, to fund things such as driving forward our local authorities and supporting them in industrial strategies. They were the building blocks of aspiration, and unless we recognise that we need tax to pay for that, we'll never have a functioning economy, let alone a civilised and decent society. So we've got to make that progressive case.
Yeah, we've spoken about devolution. Andy Burnham, who obviously you'll know well, has said, I'll get this right, if we leave the whole question of devolution, the regions and the North to the Conservative Party, we'll be making a catastrophic, historic mistake from which we may never recover. Is this the key battleground?
We're not seeing real devolution at the moment, and that's as simple as I can put it. We're seeing a devolution of cuts. And what we need to do with our communities is understand that, they had a lack of trust in politics and the political establishment. We heard a lot of this in the Brexit debate. People felt that decisions were being made about their lives by an out-of-touch elite in Brussels. Well, the fact is that most people don't feel any different about Westminster. And the only way that you change that is by having a democratic revolution. And that means a dramatic shift in power,
so what does
resources.
That look like?
I think we need to devolve far more economic decision-making power to our regions and nations, far more political power, so that yourself would be able to drive forward with the adequate resources required an industrial strategy, a green industrial revolution, so you could determine what types of industries you wanted to support, what skills sector and the amount of funding that needed to go in to support those jobs of the future. And at the moment, we're not seeing that, unfortunately.
Well, because Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham have set out 8 questions to all the candidates about mayors. We'll have a quick run through these. Some of them, I think, much more important than others. So we'll go through... do you agree that Labour mayors should have nomination rights for leader and deputy leader elections as MEPs and MPs currently do?
I think there is scope at recognising the role of regional mayors in the way that they should. And we'd have to think very carefully about how that would work in practice as well.
Well, one of the things they said is, would you agree to set up a commission with Metro mayors to report back within 12 months of you being elected as leader to examine the opportunities to devolve power to city region mayors?
Yeah, definitely.
That'll do. I like that answer. Unity, then. If we're talking about a democratic revolution, unity is part of it. Everybody wants unity. What sort of levels of debate would you accept as leader? Now, there's one thing to debate on policy, but, Boris Johnson just took the whip off 25 MPs when they wouldn't back him.
Well, it's like this. We expect our members to go out in the rain, in the snow, in the wind and campaign for our local candidates and our leader and to elect a Labour government. So we cannot have any member of the party, let alone any MP or elected representative, going out onto media and smearing or undermining their colleagues or the leader of the party. That's not to say that we don't have a debate about policy, and it's healthy that we do, and it's good that we've got so many different groups within the party pushing different policy agendas, because that means that we have that wide representation within the party, but we have those discussions behind closed doors.
Yeah.
We don't do it in public, and when we've reached an agreement about what our final position is, we swing behind the elected leader and we unify and we recognise who the real enemy is. It's the Conservative Party.
So there's questions about how we do that. I mean, your point about we should have differences of opinions. I like the phrase, if we all think the same, somebody's not thinking. But when it comes to, it's always seen by the media lens as the leader is responsible for everything that 580,000 people do. Yeah, it's clearly ridiculous and impossible. Should we be entrenching in the rules and the procedures that, look, if you are briefing against the Labour Party, you are in trouble. So it's not a question of the leader, whoever it might be, having to then be the bad guy and suppressing somebody. We say, look, that's the deal you signed up to.
Well, I think we already do have provisions in the rules about bringing the party into disrepute.
That's quite a high bar though, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's ever been tested, but I wouldn't want it to come to a stage where we'd have to take that level of action. I'm very clear that we have our debates behind closed doors, and I will be very robust when I see people acting out of scope and briefing against colleagues or any other members of the Labour Party, because it's not acceptable and we can't condone it, and we cannot go through another 4 years of what we've been through, because divided parties don't win elections.
Yeah, because there are people in the party who openly identify as Marxists, there are people who openly identify as being very much in support of the free market. It's, you know, is unity really possible? Or we're never going to have doctrinal unity?
We're never going to agree with everything all of the time, but that's why it's good that we're a broad church and we have those differences of opinion. But I've always supported the Labour Party. I would never like to speak out against any particular leader. And if I don't win this leadership contest, I might disagree with what the other candidates say on certain policy issues, but I won't brief against them. I'll support them 101%, because that's the only way we'll win an election. We're not going to get some person that leads our party that represents every single thing that we believe in.
Yeah,
but we recognise that they're the chosen leader, and we do everything within our power to make us as electable as possible and to set out a vision that appeals and transforms communities.
Absolutely, and without a strong vision, why should anyone vote for us?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, just to finish up on some personal questions then. What are you rubbish at?
Nothing, I'm good at everything.
Apart from lying. If you were in Game of Thrones, which character would you want to be?
I don't really watch Game of Thrones. I only watched it at the start when Sean Bean was in it and he went, "The North is angry." And I was like, yes, we are angry.
The North remembers.
Yeah.
Right. So if you had a fantasy dinner party, you can have 3 people from anywhere in history, who would you invite?
3 people from anywhere in history? God, that's a good question. I don't know. Tony Benn, because he'd be quite good to have a conversation with, I think. Then you'd probably want somebody funny, wouldn't you? So Carolina Hearn, who used to play Mrs. Merton, I'd have her because she'd be quite funny. Who else? And then you'd probably need some sort of musician so that you could have a bit of a sing-song after you'd had a few drinks, wouldn't you? So maybe Elton John, because I bet he's quite funny at a dinner party.
I can imagine. Yeah. What personal ambition would you want to achieve outside of politics?
I don't see, I mean, my drive, everything that brought me here was my drive to make life better for the people that I lived around within my community and help them realise their aspirations. And I knew that the only way to do that, I can try and help from the outside, from politics, but it's futile unless you're in there kicking things from the inside out. And that's what brought me to stand to become the leader of the party and then the Prime Minister, because I know that that's the biggest opportunity that I will have to make people's lives better in the way that I need to, really.
And I'm not going to ask you, have you run through a wheat field?
No, I don't think I've ever run through a wheat field.
Yeah. Becky, thank you very much
Thanks
for your
a lot.
time and how busy you are. Cheers.
Pleasure. Thanks, lovey.
We all right? Do you need to get any different angles?
No, got everything.
Perfect.
Cool.
Right. Well, I think you're...